the largest engineering project in the Arctic ever. Tunnels under the ice with railroads, and on these railroads you could have nuclear missiles running back and forth between many hundreds of launch sites.
Breaking. Deep beneath the vast frozen ice of Greenland, scientists have uncovered something straight out of a thriller. A hidden city buried for decades under nearly 100 feet of ice. What looks like myth has a real history. NASA's advanced radar revealed the long-forgotten remains of a massive Cold War military base built as part of a secret nuclear project called Camp Century. Once designed to house tunnels and nuclear weapons, its frozen corridors now lie abandoned, and its rediscovery raises chilling questions about what else lurks beneath the ice. Join us in this video as we reveal the details. What's old is buried and back again. Scientists weren't hunting for lost history when they flew over Greenland's endless white ice. They were studying the ice itself, its layers, its depth, its secrets. But then their radar hit something strange. Lines, angles, shapes that didn't belong in nature. Nearly 100 feet below the frozen surface, NASA researchers had just stumbled onto something unbelievable: a hidden underground city. The discovery happened during a flight in April 2024, when a NASA Gulfstream 3 aircraft scanned the ice using advanced radar. The team expected to see bedrock beneath miles of frozen layers. Instead, they saw the outline of human construction. At first, no one even knew what they were looking at. "We were looking for the bed of the ice, and out pops Camp Century," said NASA scientist Alex Gardner. "We didn't know what it was at first." Camp Century was not just an old base. It was part of a massive Cold War military dream, a secret project to build a nuclear missile network under the Arctic ice. Officially, it was presented as a scientific research station. In reality, it was the starting point for Project Iceworm, a plan to hide hundreds of nuclear missiles beneath Greenland. The base was built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the early 1960s under President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The idea was bold and chilling. Thousands of miles of tunnels carved into the ice, creating a mobile launch system that could survive a nuclear attack. Missiles would be fired from hidden, cut-and-cover tunnels buried about 28 feet below the surface. At its most ambitious stage, the plan included 600 Iceman nuclear missiles, spread across a frozen network larger than many U.S. states. Military planners believed this icy arsenal could destroy most Soviet targets if war broke out. Even Denmark, which owns Greenland, was not told the true purpose. Officials were led to believe it was only for research, but nature had other plans. The ice sheet was not stable. It shifted, cracked, and slowly crushed the tunnels. The project became too dangerous and expensive to maintain. By 1967, Camp Century and Project Iceworm were abandoned, buried, and forgotten beneath decades of snowfall. Until now, NASA scientists were simply trying to improve radar tools for studying ice. Instead, they uncovered a ghost from the Cold War, a nuclear dream frozen in time, hiding just beneath the surface of the modern world. But was that frozen discovery really the full story they told? Keep watching to find out. The perfect story they wanted the world to believe. To understand why the United States military built a powerful city under Greenland's ice, we first have to look at the story they shared with the world. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the U.S. government released films and news reports showing off Camp Century as a bold and peaceful scientific project. These productions did not show a secret military base. Instead, they painted a hopeful picture of science, progress, and human bravery in one of the harshest places on Earth. The official story described Camp Century as a research station where scientists studied weather patterns, ice movement, and how people could survive in extreme cold. This explanation was shared with newspapers, television stations, and even Denmark, the nation that owns Greenland. The world was told this was a place of learning, not war. Inside those carefully made films, life at Camp Century looked surprisingly comfortable. Beneath the ice, heated wooden buildings formed a small underground town. Soldiers and scientists lived together in warm spaces, protected from the deadly Arctic storms above. They had hot showers whenever they wanted and ate freshly prepared meals in a large dining hall. Supplies like steak and vegetables were flown in, making life seem almost normal. The base also had a library filled with books, a movie theater for entertainment, A small hospital with a doctor, a church for services, and even a barber shop. Every detail showed that American technology could build a safe, civilized community anywhere, no matter how extreme the environment. At the center of this frozen town was its most impressive feature, a portable nuclear reactor called the PM-2A. This machine used atomic energy to create electricity and heat. It was the first nuclear reactor designed to be taken apart, flown to a remote site, and reassembled. The reactor powered lights and equipment, but more importantly, it produced steam that heated every building through a network of pipes. The reactor became a symbol of peaceful nuclear progress. It showed the world that the United States was leading the way in advanced, helpful technology. The image was clear. Camp Century was not about weapons. It was about science, survival, and exploration for the good of humanity. This carefully built image was powerful and convincing. It made people feel inspired and proud. And because the story was so detailed and believable, it worked perfectly as a cover, hiding a much larger and far more secret military mission buried beneath the ice. Although the U.S. government tried to hide the truth about Camp Century, it was later discovered that it was just a cover for Project Iceworm. So the question many people ask now is, what exactly was Project Iceworm? Let's find out. Project Iceworm, the secret plan beneath the ice. Behind the friendly image of Camp Century was something far more serious and far more dangerous. The true mission was called Project Iceworm, a top-secret United States Army program created during the Cold War. Its goal was not simple research. It was to build a massive underground network of hidden nuclear missile launch sites beneath the Greenland ice sheet. The idea was bold and alarming. Military planners wanted a system of mobile missile bases buried deep under the ice, protected from enemy attacks. If the Soviet Union ever launched a nuclear strike, these hidden missiles would survive and be able to strike back. According to later declassified documents studied by the Danish Institute for International Studies, the plan called for as many as 600 nuclear missiles aimed at targets inside the Soviet Union. These missiles were never actually deployed, and Denmark, which officially owns Greenland, never gave permission for nuclear weapons to be placed there. For years, Danish leaders were told Camp Century was only a research project. The true purpose stayed hidden for decades. Camp Century itself began in 1959 as a cover project. It was presented publicly as a test of how humans and technology could survive in extreme Arctic conditions. But secretly, it was a test site to see if building and operating a missile network under the ice was even possible. The base was built about 150 miles from the U.S. Thule Air Base, which had already been active since 1951. Camp Century sat high on the ice sheet, more than 6,600 feet above sea level. Engineers carved 21 long trenches into the ice and covered them with curved steel roofs, creating tunnels that stretched nearly 2 miles in total length. Inside those tunnels were prefabricated buildings that formed a small underground town. There was a hospital, a shop, a theater, and even a church. Around 200 people lived there at a time. Officially, the U.S. Department of Defense told Denmark that Camp Century existed to test Arctic construction methods, operate a semi-mobile nuclear reactor, and support scientific experiments. Articles in major magazines even showed the base as a symbol of peaceful progress. But while these public explanations were true in part, they hid the much larger military goal. The secret Iceworm plan imagined a tunnel system stretching about 2,500 miles under the ice. Missile launch sites would be moved from place to place to avoid detection. It was a frozen maze designed for nuclear war. But nature refused to cooperate. Within just a few years, scientists studying ice cores discovered that the glacier was moving much faster than expected. The shifting ice would crush tunnels and launch sites in a short time. What looked stable on the surface was actually slowly flowing like a thick, frozen river. The Army realized the system would never be reliable. By 1965, Camp Century was evacuated, and the nuclear reactor was removed. A year later, both Camp Century and Project Iceworm were officially shut down. The dream of a hidden nuclear city under the ice had failed. Still, the project was not a complete loss in the eyes of scientists. The ice cores drilled at Camp Century became some of the earliest deep samples ever taken from Greenland. Even decades later, researchers continue to study those samples to understand Earth's climate history. Project Iceworm remained secret until the 1990s, when investigations in Denmark uncovered documents revealing the truth. What was once shown as a peaceful research town turned out to be the first step in a vast, hidden nuclear strategy, one that the world was never meant to see. But why did the US government decide to shut down Camp Century? Keep watching to find out. The ice was never still. When Denmark released secret documents in 1997, the true scale of Project Iceworm became even clearer. A 1960 U.S. Army report titled Strategic Value of the Greenland Ice Cap laid out a breathtaking plan. If completed, the missile network would stretch across 52,000 square miles, an area nearly 3 times the size of Denmark itself. Beneath what looked like endless frozen wilderness, engineers imagined a hidden military grid carved deep into the ice. The design called for tunnel floors about 28 feet below the surface, with missile launch systems placed even deeper. Launch centers would be spaced roughly 4 miles apart, connected by a constantly expanding system of underground passages. Every year, new tunnels would be dug. After 5 years, there could be thousands of firing positions, allowing hundreds of nuclear missiles to be moved around and hidden. This mobility was meant to make the system nearly impossible for an enemy to target. The Army even planned a special missile for the job, a modified 2-stage version of the Air Force's Minuteman missile, which they wanted to call the Iceman. It was designed specifically for life under the ice. On the surface, the Greenland ice cap looked solid and unmoving, like a frozen desert that would last forever. But scientists knew something the planners underestimated. Ice is not truly solid rock. Snow and ice are viscoelastic, meaning they slowly bend and flow over time. The ice sheet is always moving, spreading outward from its center like a very slow river. That movement created a serious problem. As the ice shifted, tunnel walls began to squeeze inward. Ceilings slowly sagged. Structures that looked stable one year could be crushed the next. By mid-1962, the ceiling of Camp Century's reactor room had already dropped several feet and had to be raised to prevent collapse. The base was literally being squeezed by the glacier around it. During a scheduled reactor shutdown for maintenance in July 1963, Army leaders made a major decision. Camp Century would no longer operate year-round. Instead, it would function only as a summer camp. The portable PM-2A nuclear reactor was never turned back on. When the base reopened in 1964, it relied on diesel generators for power. That same summer, the nuclear reactor was removed entirely. It was becoming clear that the ice was winning. By 1966, Camp Century was shut down for good. The following year, when the site was officially decommissioned, most of the structures and waste were simply left behind. At the time, officials believed the base would remain buried forever under constant snowfall. The frozen world seemed permanent and unchanging. But decades later, scientists began to worry that this assumption might not hold true. A 2016 study suggested that, if current climate trends continue, the ice covering Camp Century could begin melting by the end of this century. If that happens, the remains of the base, along with biological waste, chemical pollutants, and even low-level radioactive material, could be released back into the environment. Reports estimate that around 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, along with industrial chemicals like PCBs and other hazardous materials, were left behind. What was once thought to be safely sealed in ice could one day leak into nearby ecosystems. The hidden city beneath Greenland was not only a Cold War secret, it may also be a future environmental problem, slowly waiting beneath the surface, locked in ice that is no longer guaranteed to stay frozen. Beneath shifting ice, something far more dangerous was left behind. A frozen time capsule of toxic secrets. When the United States military made the final decision to evacuate Camp Century, leaders faced a serious and uncomfortable choice. The proper way to shut down a military base, especially one powered by a nuclear reactor, is to perform a complete cleanup. That would normally mean dismantling buildings, removing equipment, and safely transporting every bit of waste away from the site. It is a slow, difficult, and extremely expensive process, but it prevents long-term environmental harm. At Camp Century, however, a full cleanup would have created another problem: attention. Removing an entire underground city from the middle of Greenland would have required thousands of workers, heavy machinery, and a steady stream of supply planes. Such a massive operation would have raised questions around the world, and especially from Denmark, the nation that officially owned the land. If too many people started asking why so much material was being removed from what was supposedly a simple science station, the truth about Project Iceworm might come out. Military leaders made a decision that placed secrecy above environmental safety. Instead of cleaning up, they walked away. They abandoned the underground city and nearly everything in it, leaving behind what can only be described as a frozen toxic dump, hidden beneath layers of snow and ice. The scale of what they left behind is shocking when we examine official records. First, there was the physical structure of Camp Century itself. Prefabricated wooden buildings remained in the tunnels. Steel arches that held up the ceilings were left to rust inside the ice. Miles of pipes, cables, and electrical wiring stayed buried. Heavy construction equipment, tools, and machinery were also abandoned, frozen in place where they were last used. But the buildings were not the most dangerous part. Camp Century also contained enormous amounts of chemical and radioactive waste. Records show that about 200,000 liters of diesel fuel were left underground. Diesel-powered vehicles and backup generators, and it is a toxic substance that can poison soil and water. Alongside the fuel were large quantities of industrial chemicals known as PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. These chemicals were once commonly used in paints, plastics, and electrical equipment because they resist heat and do not break down easily. Today, we know that is exactly what makes them so dangerous. PCBs can remain in the environment for decades, building up in animals and humans, and they are linked to cancer and other serious health problems. The most alarming waste of all came from the nuclear reactor. Although the solid nuclear fuel was removed and shipped back to the United States, the reactor produced large volumes of radioactive cooling water while it operated. This water contained low levels of radioactive particles that are harmful to living things. Rather than collecting and safely transporting this radioactive liquid away, the military chose a far simpler and riskier method. Engineers drilled deep wells into the ice sheet and pumped the contaminated water directly into the glacier. In effect, they mixed radioactive waste into Greenland's ancient ice. This decision was based on a powerful belief. Military planners believed the Greenland ice sheet was a perfect, permanent freezer. They assumed that constant snowfall would bury Camp Century deeper every year, and that the extreme cold would keep everything locked in place forever. Diesel fuel, PCBs, radioactive ice, all of it would stay frozen and unable to spread. They believed they had found the perfect way to make a dangerous problem disappear. Instead of removing their waste, they turned the glacier into a long-term storage site, a frozen tomb meant to hide both their secrets and their pollution. For decades, it seemed like that plan had worked. But the ice that once looked eternal is now changing, and what was meant to stay buried may not stay hidden forever. But what happens when that frozen shield begins to disappear? Let's find out. When the ice stops being a freezer. The entire military plan to hide Camp Century and its dangerous waste rested on one powerful assumption. The Greenland ice sheet would stay frozen forever. For decades, that belief seemed reasonable. Snow kept falling year after year, slowly burying the base deeper beneath the surface. The extreme Arctic cold locked everything in place like a natural deep freezer. Military planners felt confident their abandoned city, along with all its pollution, would remain sealed away for thousands of years, untouched and harmless. But they could not see the future. In recent decades, scientists have shown that Earth's climate is warming. This global rise in temperature is changing the coldest regions of the planet, and Greenland is one of the most affected places. Summers are getting warmer, and more ice on the surface of the glacier is melting than ever before. This melting creates large amounts of liquid water known as meltwater. In the past, most meltwater would flow across the surface of the ice and eventually drain into the ocean. Now, a more troubling process is taking place. The water is not just staying on top. It is slipping into deep cracks, shafts, and tunnels in the ice sheet, sometimes plunging hundreds of feet downward. As it moves, it carries heat from the warm surface deep into the glacier's frozen interior. This change is a serious threat to the buried remains of Camp Century. The base lies roughly 30 to 60 meters below the surface. For the first time in history, meltwater warmed by the sun is reaching these depths. Instead of acting like a solid freezer, the ice around the base is becoming wetter and more unstable. When this liquid water reaches the buried waste, it turns into a powerful and destructive force. It can seep into old fuel containers, mixing with the remaining diesel and helping it spread. Water is also a solvent, meaning it can dissolve and carry chemicals. As it flows past old materials, it can pull PCBs out of aging paints, plastics, and electrical parts, blending them into the moving water. Even more worrying is what happens to the radioactive waste. Some of the contaminated water from the old nuclear reactor was pumped directly into the ice. As warmer meltwater moves through those areas, it can melt the surrounding ice and release radioactive particles that were once trapped. These particles can then drift freely in the flowing water. What was once frozen solid and locked in place is now becoming part of a slow-moving underground stream of pollution. Instead of staying contained, the mixture of diesel, industrial chemicals, and radioactive material can travel through natural channels within the glacier. Gravity pulls this hidden flow gradually toward the edges of the ice sheet. The frozen tomb the military depended on is no longer reliable. The same ice that once hid their secret is now changing, turning from a solid barrier into a moving system that can carry waste outward. If this polluted meltwater continues its journey, its final destination could be the cold waters of the North Atlantic Ocean, where it may enter fragile marine ecosystems. A plan built on the idea of permanent ice is facing a world where the ice is no longer permanent. If the ice reveals secrets, who must answer for them? Stay tuned to find out. Who's responsible when the ice melts? In modern international relations and environmental law, a core principle is often invoked: the polluter pays. Under this principle, the nation that produces hazardous waste is financially and technically responsible for managing it. But Camp Century exists in a murky legal and diplomatic gray zone, where outdated Cold War treaties collide with new environmental realities, creating a decades-long deadlock over responsibility. Instead of a clear path for disaster management, the issue has become a tangled cycle of blame shifting among three parties: the United States, Denmark, and Greenland. The legal foundation for the U.S. presence in Greenland lies in the 1951 defense agreement signed with Denmark. This treaty allowed the United States to build and operate military installations on Greenlandic soil, but it did not account for environmental protections or the long-term management of hazardous waste. In 1951, no one imagined a world where radioactive, chemical, and diesel pollution could remain buried for decades under a melting ice sheet. The treaty simply did not specify obligations for cleanup after U.S. forces left, leaving a major loophole that continues to shape the debate today. The United States has relied on this omission to argue that it acted lawfully. By decommissioning Camp Century and returning control of the site to Denmark, Washington claims it fulfilled its obligations. From this perspective, responsibility now lies with the sovereign authority, Denmark, to manage any consequences of the abandoned base. Denmark, however, presents a counter-argument. Officials point out that they were never fully informed about the scale or the dangers of the waste left behind. When Denmark gave consent for the 1959 project, the understanding was that Camp Century was a purely scientific research station. There was no mention of chemical, diesel, or radioactive waste connected to a secret missile program. For Danish authorities, the scope of contamination was far beyond what they had agreed to, leaving them hesitant to assume full responsibility for an environmental problem they did not knowingly authorize. Greenland, the self-governing territory most directly impacted, is caught in a particularly difficult position. While the island bears the environmental and ecological risks of the melting ice and potential contamination, it lacks both the financial resources and technological capacity to carry out a cleanup of this magnitude on its own. Former Greenlandic Prime Minister Aleqa Hammond has publicly criticized the lack of transparency surrounding Camp Century, describing the situation as a violation of the rights of indigenous people. The people who live closest to the risks of contamination have little power to address them, adding a profound ethical dimension to the dispute. At the heart of this deadlock are issues of feasibility and cost. Cleaning up Camp Century is not a simple operation. It would require a massive and surgical intervention into the ice sheet, excavating millions of tons of snow and ice at great depth in extreme Arctic weather. Experts estimate the cost could range from hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, depending on the methods chosen and the safety precautions necessary to prevent further contamination. Even with unlimited resources, intervention carries serious risks. Aggressive excavation could rupture pockets of toxic fuel, release harmful PCB vapors, or spread liquid diesel and radioactive waste over a wider area. Paradoxically, attempting to remove the contaminants could accelerate environmental harm rather than contain it. These risks have created a state of paralysis. No party is willing to take on the immense financial, technical, and political burden of acting first. Behind closed doors, diplomatic discussions continue, but no concrete roadmap has emerged. Politicians debate the wording of treaties signed decades ago, while the ice itself does not wait. Arctic temperatures continue to rise year after year, accelerating the melting that threatens to expose the waste. Human legal systems operate on assumptions of stability and predictability. Treaties, environmental regulations, and agreements are designed to work in a world where conditions remain relatively constant. But nature is changing faster than the negotiations can respond. In the case of Camp Century, this mismatch has created a dangerous reality. A potential disaster is approaching, yet no clear party has accepted responsibility for preventing it. The ice that was once considered a permanent tomb for Cold War secrets may soon become a conduit for contamination, and the world's outdated agreements may not provide a single solution in time. While Greenland melts, leaders bicker. How seriously do they take it? Stay tuned to find out. A joke at a black-tie dinner, but with Greenland in the punchline. A new report from the Washington Post says that President Donald Trump used his speech at a high-profile black-tie dinner to make jokes about Greenland, the very island now at the center of environmental and diplomatic concerns. The event was the annual Alfalfa Club dinner, an elite gathering of politicians, business leaders, and Washington figures where humor and sharp remarks are often expected. According to witnesses, Trump did not hold back. As he addressed the crowd, which included heavy hitters like J.P. Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon and Federal Reserve officials, he mixed barbs about his political opponents with off-the-cuff humor about international affairs. At one point, he reportedly quipped about having to cut his speech short to watch the invasion of Greenland, before immediately adding that he was joking. This comment surprised the room, and parts of the crowd reportedly fell into awkward silence. But the Greenland jokes didn't stop there. Trump allegedly told the audience, "We're not going to invade Greenland, we're going to buy it." He went on to mock the idea of expanding the United States by saying, "It's never been my intention to make Greenland the 51st state. I want to make Canada the 51st state. Greenland will be the 52nd state. Venezuela can be 53rd. The remarks stirred reactions both inside and outside the room. Some laughed, others didn't, and the comments quickly became a talking point among political observers. Despite Trump's note that the Greenland invasion line was a joke, it highlighted something he has mentioned seriously in recent years: his interest in Greenland's strategic importance and, at times, its possible acquisition. Not all details from the evening are public because the event was closed to the media, but reports say that after the dinner, Trump boarded Air Force One to fly to Palm Beach, where he continued speaking with reporters about a range of topics. Whether the Greenland comments were meant purely as humor or carried political weight, they reflect how the island has become part of the broader conversation about U.S. foreign policy, climate change, and Arctic strategy, all wrapped in the unique style of a closed-door dinner speech. What are your thoughts about the discovered hidden nuclear city beneath Greenland? Let us know in the comments section below. What started as a routine scientific scan turned into the rediscovery of a buried Cold War secret, a nuclear city frozen in time beneath Greenland's ice. Camp Century is more than an abandoned base. It's a warning from the past, resurfacing in a warming world. Hidden weapons plans, toxic waste, and melting ice now collide in a story that feels less like history and more like a ticking clock. If this discovery shocked you, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Click the next video to explore more hidden stories the world was never meant to uncover.